Today on episode 18 of the Missionary Coach Show, we'll be continuing our Missionary Stories series with reading chapter 10 of Rudy Lack's book, Breakthrough, called Faith Rewarded. So, in Volunteer Christian Mission since 1999, I am your missionary coach, Bill Hutchison. This is the show where we talk about all things missions related, from preparations, travel, training, relationships, building a support network, testimonies and stories, and more. So last time we finished reading Rudy Lack's book, we finished chapter 9, which was about the Chinese, and Rudy was trying to find a way to actually get to talking with the Chinese who were building the railway in Tanzania, I think is where he is right now. So we'll continue reading the book this week, and I'm for one, kind of looking forward to seeing what happens and how he actually meets up with the Chinese and where we go from there. So this time we are reading chapter 10. It is a bit of a long chapter once again, so hopefully my voice doesn't get too croaky, but hey, we'll see how we go. So chapter 10 is called Faith Rewarded. I had one more week with the team in Soroti before we reunited with Floyd McClung's group for my final week of summer outreach in Africa. We met together at a missions compound in the town of Kisumu, where we were booked to run a youth camp for 300 young Africans. Sorry, this is okay. So it looks like we're jumping to another part. I was hoping he was going to go straight to chatting with the Chinese or finding the Chinese workers, but I guess not. So they were doing a youth camp for 300 young Africans. Situated on Lake Victoria, the compound belonged to the same missionary organization we had associated with in Nairobi and Soroti. The 300-acre enclosure was set in an attractive wooded bushland with the 20 or more brick bungalows scattered between the trees. It was a pleasant change to the crowded, fly-ridden conditions we had experienced in Uganda. The cooler climate, too, was a welcome relief from the sweltering heat of Soroti or the even more sauna-like temperatures I'd experienced in Dar es Salaam. All 11 of us were staying at the guest house. It had been 6 weeks since we had been together, so our first couple of hours were a boisterous reunion of laughter and animated conversations as we each vied to share our various experiences. Floyd McClung's Kenyan team had an amazing variety of opportunities presented to them. They had spoken in universities, schools, and even been invited to teach at a Bible college. They had visited a number of towns and cities throughout Kenya and preached in a large, prestigious churches as well as to remote village congregations. Like us, they found the same ready response to their messages. We told of our spiritual battle and the breakthrough and consequential revival we had experienced in Soroti. There was rapt attention as I shared about my trip to Dar es Salaam, my encounter with Simon Malaya, and our plans to reach the Chinese. Finally, talked out and peopled out, I decided to get away on my own. I stood outside the guest house, taking in the beauty of the lush green woodland and enjoying the unaccustomed, refreshing, cool air. About 2 kilometers away, blocked from my view by the trees, were the massive clear blue waters of Lake Victoria. I'd been told the lake was even larger than the whole of Switzerland. I looked around at the impressive array of buildings that made up the community. In addition to the missionary homes and guest houses, there was a Bible school. The Bible school students were currently on vacation, and the bungalow-style buildings, comprising a lecture hall and housing facilities, was where we would be holding the camp. It was also where the 300 young Africans would be housed when they arrived the next day. Beyond the Bible school was another large building. I was trying to work out what it might be used for when I heard a voice behind me. "Welcome." I turned to see a tan, smiling white face. "I take it you're one of the YM team helping with the youth camp?" He stretched out his hand and introduced himself as one of the Canadian staff. "It's quite an impressive setup you have here," I enthused. "Yes, we've been blessed all right. Have you seen around?" I had a quick look through the Bible school, but that's all. I pointed to the brick structure beyond the Bible school. I was wondering what this building was used for. "Come, I'll show you." Without further explanation, the Canadian strode off in the direction of the building. I followed, curious to know what the large structure could contain. It looked almost like a small factory, but what would a factory be doing on a missionary compound? I guessed it was more likely to be a warehouse for vehicles, or maybe an extensive workshop for repairs. The Canadian unlocked the side door and opened it to let me in. Everyone's gone for the day, so nothing's going on, but you can get a good idea of the operation. I stepped inside and let out an involuntary whistle. Before me stood one large commercial Heidelberg printing press and several other smaller ones. There were folding machines, all the equipment needed for commercial printing. Reams of paper of various sizes were neatly stocked in shelves along one wall. Pallets lined the other wall were topped with newly printed books. I was stunned by the revelation. So you're into book publishing? It's fully commercial, the Canadian said with more than a tinge of pride. Do you do printing for outsiders? I asked. In my mind's eye, I could see pallets of red-bound gospels lining the walls. For sure, the missionary replied. We supply books and gospels for people all over the country, not just for our organization, but anyone who needs them. That's very interesting. We walked back outside and locked the door. It had only been a week since Simon Malay and I had established our strategy for reaching the Chinese, and now, without even trying, God had answered our first major need of locating an African-based publisher and printer. In the next week, we saw scores of young Africans touched by God and motivated for missions. But the aspect that thrilled me most about my stay in Kisumu was my discovery of the missions publishing business. During my week there, I talked with the person in charge of publishing and negotiated some very reasonable prices for printing 10,000 red-bound Chinese Gospels. I now had just 2 barriers to surmount in order to fulfill my commitment to Simon Malay. I needed permission from Brother Andrew to reproduce the booklets, and thousands of Kenyan shillings to pay for them. At the end of our week in Kisumu, I left the round-the-world team, who were moving on to Guam, and returned to Switzerland. It was strange to be back on European soil, away from the flies, heat, smells, and dust of Africa. Instead of standing out as the odd white face in the sea of black ones, I merged as a non-entity into the ordered crowds at Geneva Airport. Back in Lausanne, it was wonderful to reunite with my SEO classmates. We chatted excitedly, sharing our stories. I heard details of Joe's spiritual conquests on the streets of Paris and Don's successful mission in Germany. Al told of the challenges he had encountered as he attempted to evangelize in Franco-dominated Spain, and Riona told us of her attempts to reach the more conservative English. In turn, I kept them enthralled with my own adventures of Africa. There was lots of mail to read. Of greatest interest, however, was a postcard from Bulgaria. Sent from the pastor in Sofia, it merely read, "The weather is nice in Bulgaria." Those few words made all the tension, financial cost, emotional trauma, physical exertion, and the spiritual battles that we had gone through to complete our Bible smuggling venture worthwhile. It bolstered my faith for the assignment that lay ahead. Each student had his or her own plan for the future. Joe was heading back to France. Al had a call into Slavic ministry. Don and Dion had a vision for a major outreach to coincide with the Olympic Games in Munich in just under 2 years' time. With thousands of young people coming together for this single event, it would be the largest outreach YWAM had yet undertaken. Consequently, it would take considerable planning. Riona was staying on in Switzerland, but had plans to return to England later. Exhilarating as it was to reunite, share vision, and learn of each one's future direction, the most meaningful encounter for me during those final few days of the SEO was my reunion with Brother Andrew. I was thrilled to learn that he was to be our graduation speaker. When I heard late Friday afternoon that he had arrived, I went looking for him and found him in the downstairs dining room. "Rudy, good to see you." He put his cup aside and gave me a warm embrace. "And where did you go for your outreach?" "Mainly to Uganda," I said, sitting at the table beside him. Andrew's eyes lit up. "Africa? Tell me about it." I launched into a detailed description. I shared how God had used his remark to Floyd in India to ignite my own call to the Chinese working on the Tan Sam railway project. I told him about my trip to Dar es Salaam, my amazing encounter with Simon Malaya, and his willingness to join hands with me in this project. "That's wonderful," Andrew encouraged. "It may seem an enormous undertaking, Rudy, but I tell you it's a great deal easier to reach the Chinese in Africa than to get the gospel to them in mainland China. If there is any way I can help, please let me know." I took a deep breath. Now came a sensitive issue. In my enthusiasm, I'd already committed myself to the publishing house in Kisumu to print 10,000 copies of a red-covered Chinese scripted Gospel of John. In hindsight, I should have gotten Brother Andrew's permission first. Well, there is a way you could help. Brother Andrew's eyes locked with mine. How is that, Rudy? As Simon Malay and I were discussing strategy on how to best to reach the Chinese in Africa, I thought of your Chairman Mao-style booklets. How would you feel about us reprinting them in Africa? Andrew looked thoughtful. I held my breath. Was he going to refuse? He had every right to do so. Where would you print them? Andrew inquired. There's a mission compound in Kisumu on Lake Victoria that has a commercial printing press. I have already checked it out. They'd be willing to print 10,000. Andrew's eyes opened. Oh, really? I wanted to bite my tongue. Had I overstepped the mark? How much would they charge to print that many? He asked. I gave him the quote the Kisumu printers had given me. Andrew nodded his head slowly and then, looking past me through the window, tapped his finger absently on his empty cup. I did not say anything. Inside, however, my heart was beating in time with his tapping finger. Did he think I had been presumptuous in making arrangements before I received Open Doors for official permission? After a few moments, but what seemed like an eternity, Andrew looked straight at me. I think we could do it. You arrange to get the red booklets printed in Kenya, and Open Doors will pick up the tab. Wow. I stared at him, my mouth open like a goldfish. You'll what? I sputtered. We'll pay the bill, he repeated calmly. Are you sure about that? I asked, reluctant to accept. It's a lot of money. I know, but the thrust of Open Doors Ministry is to get the gospel across uncrossable borders. What you're attempting to do in Africa is invaluable. We want to back you as much as we can. I stared at him stunned, overwhelmed by his generosity. Just get the books printed and have the publishers send us the account, Andrew said as casually as if it had been ordered, as if he had offered to buy me ice cream cone instead of paying for printing of 10,000 booklets. Sorry, that's just nuts. For our part, we'll do everything we can to get them into the hands of the communist Chinese, I assured him. Thank you so very much. I marveled at the ease in which God had dismantled seemingly insurmountable barriers. First, the discovery in Simon Malay of a bold Tanzanian Christian, one who was willing to put God's law of love above the restrictive law of his nation, a law that forbade any contact with the Chinese workers. Second, the provision of a publisher in Kenya who was prepared to print the literature at a very reasonable cost. And now, third, Open Doors' permission not only to reprint their version of the red booklet, but their willingness to meet all the printing costs. When Jesus gives an instruction, then if we, like Peter, are willing to step out of the boat in obedience, God will perform the impossible. He will enable us to do what we cannot, walk on the water. No matter how impossible it is, humanly speaking, nothing is too difficult for God. Brother Andrew's offer gave new impetus not only for my assignment to reach the Chinese, but also for my whole missionary call to Africa. Over the next 4 months, I traveled throughout Europe, including Great Britain, speaking at churches, youth meetings, camps, and Bible schools, sharing on the evangelistic opportunities in that continent and the need for people to be involved in short-term service. These did not have to be people with special qualifications. All they needed was a passion to reach the lost with good news of salvation. The more people I could recruit, the better. While in the United States, speaking at Oral Roberts University at Tulsa, Oklahoma, I was encouraged to find students already prepared with a vision for mainland China. Although the bamboo curtain remained tightly closed, some had been studying Mandarin in preparation for the day when it would open. I challenged them regarding the already open door in Tanzania. A couple eagerly signed up. Typical of the caliber of the short-term missionaries I recruited during these 4 months, it was the wiry Scotsman and fully qualified accountant Ian Muir. In his mid-20s, Ian had a heart for missions, but could not see how he could be freed from his work to join us in Africa. I was staying with Ian and his mother in Edinburgh. It doesn't have to be a long term, Ian, I challenged, attempting to warm my semi-frozen hands in front of the dying embers in the open fireplace. We had just returned from a meeting at Ian's home church. He picked up the poker and stirred the coals into life. When I hear your stories, Rudy, everything stirs within me. The orange-red flames dance merrily in the hearth, releasing their much-welcomed warmth. I'd love to be on your team next year, but what, Ian? I asked, accepting a steaming cup of broth from Ian's mother. Wouldn't your boss give you 3 months leave? Yes, he would, but what? What's holding you back? Money? No, I've got enough saved. He looked at his mother, who had joined us. Since she had been a widow several years earlier, Ian had been her main support. Don't worry about me, son, she interjected. I'll be fine. But what happens when? She did not let Ian finish. If I have any needs, there are plenty of friends and neighbors I can call on. Ian gazed back into the fire. I sat, holding my cup, letting his penetrating heat bring life into my stiffened fingers. I could imagine the struggle going through Ian's heart. Africa was an unknown continent. Well, his mother said that she'd be okay. He knew how much she depended on him. And I guess there was also the financial commitment. Air tickets were not cheap, and although he had money saved, there would be no financial benefit to show for his 3 months' absence. As an accountant, he was well aware of that. But, like those dying embers of the fire, his vision had been stirred. In the service that night, I had told Roli and my adventures in Bulgaria, the spiritual victories and revival we had experienced in Soroti, and my recent week-long Bible smuggling excursion into East Germany and Moscow. I had particularly noticed Ian's reaction as I spoke. His eyes had been riveted on me, and I could see he was drinking in every word. But it was when I started talking about Africa, my call to the Chinese, and my meeting with Simon Malay that his eyes really opened. He was sitting on the edge of his seat as I challenged the congregation that mission was something they should get involved in. Had I given an altar call, I'm sure Ian would have been the first to come forward. Now, as the immediate fervor of the moment had passed, and he had begun to weigh up what it would really cost to join a 3-month outreach to Africa, he was having second thoughts. It's taking the step, isn't it? I said, seeking to rekindle his wavering zeal. Stepping out from your regular routine, staring into the fire's dancing flames, he quietly admitted his problem. Sorry, just a water break. I just need the courage to break out and follow my heart's desire. You can do it, Ian, I said. Just make the decision to go for it. It's a great opportunity, son, his mother encouraged. I would seriously consider Rudy's offer. Ian nodded slowly. I can't get those Chinese out of my mind, but he sighed. Picking up his nearly cold broth and gulping it down, he looked back into the hearth. Then, placing his mug decisively on the table, he turned to me. There was a sparkle in his eyes. I knew he had made his decision. I'll come with you to Africa, Rudy. Having made the commitment, there was no stopping him. In fact, by the time I was ready to leave the next morning, he was so eager to go that he had decided to take 4 months off instead of 3 and join me in Nairobi in February, a full month before the rest of the team was due to arrive. Ian's decision, as with every recruit, was a big commitment. Not only would it cost them time and money, but for some, it meant putting their studies temporarily aside. For others, it required leaving their job with no assurance that their position would still be open when they returned. And for a few, Ian included, what would start as a short-term outreach would evolve into lifelong commitment. But what finally motivated their choice was the yearning to have a part in harvesting the vast fields of untouched souls in Africa. The excitement of stepping out in faith, and the unique opportunity to take the gospel to the communist Chinese. By the time Ian and I were ready to leave in February, we had 20 who had committed themselves to join us in March. It was an international team of Americans, British, Swedish, Finnish, and Germans ranging in age from 20 to 30 years and coming from a variety of backgrounds. Some were college students who were taking time out of their studies. Others were professionals, including a nurse, a couple of teachers, and of course Ian Muir as our only qualified accountant. In contrast to my first trip to Africa, flying into Nairobi was like coming home. With Ian tagging uncertainly behind me, I confidently pushed my way through the surge of African travelers. Making my way out of the turmoil of the departure lounge, I stepped into the heat and chaos of Nairobi's airport traffic and authoritatively hailed down a taxi. We loaded our luggage into the resting vehicle. Along with my well-traveled gray case and Ian's gear was the box of literature supplies, samples that I had collected during my travels. The most precious item was Brother Andrew's red-bound Chinese version of the Gospel of John, which I planned to take immediately to Kisumu to be printed. I also had other material, including a book for children that I had picked up in the States, which I intended to have translated into Swahili and also published on the mission's printing presses. As our Kenyan driver wove his way expertly between overcrowded buses, honking battered vehicles, and open lemon-laden trucks. I carefully observed Ian's face as he took in his first sights, sounds, and smells of an African city. Bit different from Edinburgh, eh? I smiled. Yes, and definitely hotter, he commented, wiping his forehead with the already damp handkerchief. Wait till you get to Dar es Salaam in Tanzania. Then you'll really know what heat is. I smiled knowingly. Our few days in Nairobi before we headed inland to Kisumu were hectic. My main task was to purchase a car. While in Europe, I had made the decision to sell my faithful red Saab and buy a new one in Africa. No more spring prodding bus rides for me. With our planned literature distribution to the Chinese, I needed a car in good condition, one that could be relied upon to cope with the thousands of kilometers of often uneven, potholed, dirty-packed roads that lay ahead. After thoroughly investigating the market and traipsing from dealer to dealer, Ian and I finally chose a tidy 5-year-old light blue Toyota, which seemed to meet all my requirements. Stowing our gear in the back of my newly purchased vehicle, we left behind the now familiar bustling city roads of Nairobi and headed northwest towards Lake Victoria. Ian's eyes were wide as saucers as we entered the vast savanna plains with its endless sea of meter-high, golden waving grasses. Every new scene, each fresh clump of straw-thatched African huts, and every distant lone gazelle was an object to be photographed. But as one weary 100 kilometers merged into the next, the monotony of the journey took its toll. Ian's initial awe wore off, and the camera was put aside, unclicked, until eventually, 12 hours after leaving Nairobi, we left behind the plains and began to climb into the more lush vegetation of northern Kenya. Finally, we had our first glimpse of the waters of Lake Victoria. A few kilometers on, we turned in through the mission compound gates at Kisumu. My new Toyota had passed its inaugural test with flying colors. In the next 3 weeks, before the rest of the team joined us, I concentrated my efforts on overseeing the production of the Chinese Gospels, as well as other Christian books I had brought with me, including the yellow-covered children's book. By the time the entire team of 21, including myself, assembled early March at our base at the Kisumu Mission Guest House, the bulk of the printing was accomplished. My vision of pallets with 10,000 red-bound booklets lining the wall of the print house had become a reality. I brought an unopened box into the guest house lounge where the team was having its first official meeting. "This is it," I said, dumping the newly sealed carton on the floor and dramatically ripping it open. Pulling out generous handfuls, I gave these out. There was a combined chorus of response. The stronger American accents rose above the softer Scandinavian tones and more clipped English voices. "Great, fabulous, wow." Then all that could be heard were pages turning as each one flicked through the new crisp paper. Only the two from Oral Roberts University could actually decipher the script, but for everyone else the message was clear. In their hands was concrete evidence of a project of faith, one of which all of them were going to play an active role. Although the 21-strong team was made up of strangers, the majority of which I had only met in the last 24 hours, there was an immediate bonding. We had been drawn together by a common concern, a desire to share God's love with the African, but specifically those communist Chinese workers assigned to the Tanzam Railway project. Now the books had been printed, we faced the next vital step in that assignment, smuggling these books from the safe terrain of Kenya across the border into the nation of Tanzania, where such a literature was strictly forbidden. The next week had been assigned as a time of initiation, a chance for the team to get to know one another and be introduced to YWAM's foundational operating principles, in particular the role of intercession. Our upcoming smuggling excursion into Tanzania became our major prayer project. Many hours were dedicated to praying not only for its success, but also for God's overruling hand in the entire distribution of the red booklet in Africa. At the end of the week, we planned to split up and go in separate directions. Some would head north, returning to our old stomping grounds around Soroti. They would also penetrate into other areas of Uganda. Another team would travel south to the unexplored territory, as far as YWAM was concerned, of Zambia. Only the remaining 8 of us would be responsible for actually ferrying the forbidden literature into Tanzania. Although we would be many thousands of kilometers apart over the next 3 months, our hearts were united in our desire to see this project completed. All 21 of us committed ourselves to remain focused in prayer for the success of the outreach to the Chinese. Our plan was to smuggle in 1,000 red Gospels and other newly printed literature at 2 different points. Ian, together with 2 Swedish girls, and I would drive my blue Toyota through the Serengeti Game Reserve and enter by a seldom used border that cut through the middle of the park. The border was not used very often because, after crossing it, the road eventually petered out and turned into mere tracks through the bush. It seemed a precarious route, but the missionaries of Kisumu assured us that if we used the mountain range as our guide, we would eventually hit the main road. The other 4 would go take an overnight ferry across Lake Victoria. We would meet together on the southern lake port of Mwanza. Ian and I would then travel alone to Dar es Salaam, where we would deliver our precious load to Simon Malaya. The other 6 would remain evangelizing around Mwanza, working ironically with Fritz, the German missionary who had cast such negative predictions on the fact-finding tour to Dar es Salaam. That was the plan. The tricky part lay immediately ahead, getting the book safely across the border into Tanzania. Well, that's them off, I said, turning to Ian as we saw the last of the Ugandan team onto their public bus and safely on their way. The team to Zambia had left an hour earlier. As I watched the overloaded bus disappear behind the trees with its baskets, cloth bundles, and our own team's luggage precariously roped on top, I recalled my own spring-poking ride from Nairobi to Uganda. While our trip to Tanzania held potentially more risk, I breathed the silent prayer of thanks that at least we could travel in the comfort of my own car. Let's hope the girls have got our Toyota packed. I'd like to make it to Mwanza before dark. We headed back to the Kisumu compound to the van the missionaries had graciously allowed us to use in order to transport the team down to the bus station. Do you think we'll have any problems at the border? Ian asked. I hope not, I answered, looking out to admire our last view of Lake Victoria before it became hidden from view in the trees. According to our information, the guards are pretty laid back in the Serengeti Park crossing, but one can never be sure. We need to be prepared for the unexpected. I glanced over at Ian and noted the glint in his eyes. It was almost as if he wanted something dramatic to occur. We steered the van through the mission gates, and driving past the single-story bungalows, semi-hidden in their tree-studded setting, we pulled up in front of the brick guest house, just in time to see the Swedes loading the last box into my blue car. Each carton was identically sized and stamped with the same Mission Publishing logo. Their contents, however, were quite different. One of the 5 boxes held the yellow-covered Swahili translation of the children's book. The other 4 contained the red-bound Chinese Gospels of John. Where have you put the children's books? I asked the fair-haired Swede as she staggered towards the car with the final box. It's in the rear of the trunk. Let's put the children's books towards the front of the trunk, I suggested. If the border guards want to investigate, we can show them these. Hopefully they won't want to look further. Good thinking, Rudy, she said, helping me rearrange the cardboard containers. Just helping make seeing eyes blind, eh? Ian grinned. By the time we squashed our own luggage in the trunk and put the overflow in the back seat, there was barely enough room for the 4 of us to squeeze in. The Toyota was running precariously low to the ground. We would be riding on some pretty rough gravel roads through the Serengeti Game Reserve. Lord, just let the suspension hold up, okay? I prayed silently. I backed the Toyota and waved to the remaining team of 4. See you off the ship tomorrow morning at Mwanza, I shouted through the open window. I sounded more confident than I felt. Groaning under the unaccustomed weight, the Toyota slowly grunted into action. Then, kicking up some gravel, we were on our way. Driving out through the gates and onto the open road, I adjusted my glasses and relaxed in the driver's seat, thankful that after so many weeks of preparation, this crucial part of the operation was finally underway. The Toyota purred steadily along the open road. After several hours of driving, we came down from the elevated wooded green of Kisumu into the lowland bush and savanna grass of the Serengeti Game Reserve. This was my second and others' first time to experience a game park. It was migrating season, the very best time to visit. For the next few hours, our attention shifted from concern about whether or not we would make it safely across the border to focusing on the wild game. We were particularly enraptured by the sight of tens of thousands of wildebeest, an animal roughly the size of a zebra but brown in color and of the cow family, moving in massive waves across the plains. We sighted at least 50 giraffes at one time, as well as a herd of buffalo. Gazelles were so common at the time they blocked the road. I had to virtually sit on the horn before they gracefully bounded off, loping over the low bushes. Everyone's eyes were straining to the horizon to sight some more wild rhinoceroses, or maybe even a lion. While the others were focused on camera-clicking excitement of the wild game, the lions looming in my vision were the human ones, the guards at the upcoming border. By now, I had entered a few communist countries, but even with the Bible smuggling experience under my belt, I knew I could not afford to approach this frontier casually. There was always the chance of something going wrong. We had been assured that the guards were pretty laid back, but they were like lions sprawled half asleep by their watering hole. While they might appear harmless enough, these officials only needed to get a whiff that things were not in order, and they would pounce, striking a deathly blow to our mission. A couple of kilometers before we were due to cross from Kenya into Tanzania, I stopped the car, and we had a time of prayer, again committing our cargo to the Lord's protection. Lord, please make the seeing eyes blind, Ian prayed fervently. Amen, amen, we all agreed. We had done our part, now it was up to God. As it turned out, our entrance into Tanzania was a low-key affair. There was none of the barbed wire or posted sentries I could become accustomed to when traveling behind the Iron Curtain, just a couple of sleepy attendants. One of them, a gun casually slung over his shoulder, ambled out of the small hut and over to where we had pulled up. Probably ours was the first vehicle that had gone through all day, possibly all week. The guard looked harmless enough, even bored, but, like the lion at the watering hole, I knew I could not afford to relax, even for a moment. He gave me a half yawn as he collected our passports, casually glanced through them, and then gave them the official stamp. You look well laden. What are you carrying? Books, I said, opening the trunk for him to see. His eyes widened as he viewed the 5 boxes crammed in the back. What sort of books? My heart missed a beat. Inside the car, the other 3 had their heads bowed. Was the lion about to pounce? We're Christian missionaries, I said. This is literature for distribution. I opened the nearest box and pulled out a yellow Swahili children's book, handing it to him. How thankful I was I had taken the precaution of rearranging the containers. He flicked through the pages and after a few seconds handed it back. He then glanced at the other boxes. Lord, don't let him ask to see their contents, I prayed. Every muscle in my body tensed. Okay, have a nice day. Sorry, have a good day, the guard said, waving us through. As I got back behind the wheel and drove on, I started humming. We had passed the watering hole, and the lion, not aware of the prey under his nose, had failed to pounce. Lord, thank you for making seeing eyes blind, the girls shouted jubilantly on the back seat. Just as we were warned, the road petered out several hours beyond the border. By now it was late afternoon. We had only a few precious hours of daylight left. All we had to follow was a poorly defined grass track between the bushes and a mountain range that ran alongside us. The missionaries had warned us that it was essential we reach the sealed road before Africa's night blanket covered us. If we did not, we would be hopelessly lost. No longer worrying about the potholes or trying to avoid the gazelles on our path, I put my foot on the accelerator and went for it. With frightening gazelles leaping to either side of us, we bumped precariously over the uncharted terrain, following the barely visible grass tracks. All chatter stopped, and knuckles whitened as the other 3 grabbed the handles to steady themselves from the crazy driving. I was taking reckless risk, but no one complained. We all knew how important it was for us to reach the asphalt road before darkness enveloped us. Dusk was fast approaching, and there was still no sign of the road. Gazelles still leaping out in every direction, I kept my foot on the accelerator. I thanked the Lord that the Toyota seemed to be handling the conditions okay. Just keep it going, I prayed. Then suddenly, what I had feared most happened. There was a huge bang as the front fender collided with a young gazelle that had not been able to get out of her way on time. The car swerved precariously. I clung to the wheel and managed to keep us upright. "Oh no," one of the Swedish girls gasped. "It is hurt." I glanced through the rear mirror and saw the stunned gazelle lying on the ground behind us. It would probably not survive. Everything within me wanted to stop, but there was little we could have done. This was the African wild, where the law of is survival of the fittest. I hated to think I had caused the death of one of these gracious creatures, but our own survival was also at stake. We were a mixed team, and besides, we had no equipment to last the night in the game reserve. So leaving the wounded gazelle to its own fate, we pressed on. Darkness was fast rolling in. By now, the mountain range was only a purple silhouette along the horizon to our right. We only had minutes before all visibility would be wiped out. "Lord, get us to that road," I prayed in desperation. I could sense the same silent cries of the others as they, too, sent up emergency petitions to the Almighty. We were all acutely aware of the danger. Sorry, just give me a sec. I'll be right back. All right, sorry, just had to blow my nose. Didn't think you wanted to watch me do that. All right. My faith was beginning to waver. Was God going to answer our prayers? Then, just as visibility was running out, I spotted the sealed road in the headlights. Relief flooded my heart as we bounced and bumped over the remaining meters of grass track. Reaching the road, I stopped my car. My heart still beating wildly from the pent-up tension of my crazy 2-hour drive, we let rip in a time of exuberant, loud, and very grateful praise to God. Heading south, we drove in a much more subdued manner, until about an hour later we finally arrived at Wanza. We pulled out outside the house where the German missionary Fritz had his headquarters. Although we had communicated by letter to arrange the team's visit here, I had not made personal contact with Fritz since our initial meeting in Sarodi. He had heard no details of the outcome of my fact-finding trip to Dar es Salaam. After hugs and introductions all around, I showed Fritz our treasure. His eyes were like saucers when I opened the box in the trunk of the car and showed him its carefully stacked contents of the red booklets. When I told him the story leading up to their production, my encounter with Simon Malaya, my contact with the publishing house in Kisumu, Brother Andrew's generous offer to pay for publishing, and even the neat ease with which we had made it through the border, he shook his head. "I guess you have more faith than I have, Rudy," he admitted, ruefully, taking the red-covered book from my hand and scanning its pages of neat Chinese script. "I must admit, when you first shared your vision with me, I dismissed it as a scatterbrained scheme of an idealistic young man. I honestly didn't believe anyone would be willing to take a risk and help you. But I can see I was wrong. God really was in it. He gave me back the gospel. I gotta hand it to you, Rudy. It's a real lesson for me." I laid my hand reassuringly on his broad, stocky shoulders. "What you shared was extremely important, Fritz. Without your words of caution, I would have blundered in and blown the whole project." "Thanks, Rudy," he said. "And we're not there yet," I added. "There's still the cartons that the others are bringing over by ferry tonight." A broad smile creased Fritz's face. "I should be able to help there. I've had a lot of dealings with customs. There's one officer with whom I have established quite a relationship. If he's on duty, we shouldn't have any problems." The next morning, I watched nervously as the team staggered down the gangway of the overnight ferry, loaded not only with their own luggage, but also carrying a heavy box of books. They entered the large, open-ended custom shed and dumped the cardboard containers on the table, ready for the dreaded inspection. We stood watching only a few meters away. The team looked at us all smiles. Outwardly, they appeared relaxed. On the inside, however, I knew their hearts were pounding as wildly as mine had been at the Serengeti border the day before. As a Tanzanian customs officer approached the team leader, Fritz gave him a reassuring wave. "They're with us," he said. "Fine," the customs officer smiled back. Then, without even a question as to what the boxes contained, he stamped the team's forms and allowed them all through. 1,000 red-bound Chinese Gospels have been safely delivered into Tanzania. Now lay the next crucial stage, getting the booklets into the hands of the Chinese railroad workers themselves. Like the rough, grassy tracks we had followed out of the Serengeti Game Reserve, it was uncharted territory. Thankfully, though, we had another mountain range to follow, God's instructions to us through his Holy Spirit. There we go. That's the end of chapter 10. Chapter 11 is called Contacting the Chinese. So that will be fun to see how they pull that off, given that the Chinese are all cloistered in secure facilities the whole time that they're there. So should be interesting. So I, for one, I'm really enjoying the book. I hope you are too. I'm continually reminded just of how the Holy Spirit has led them, both in who to share with and what to share, and just how they've been connected with the right people at the right time, whether it's provision of the booklets or the connection with the Tanzanian pastor, and also just the discernment that Rudy had to not share with the pastor what he was planning to do when the friend of the pastor, who happened to be a journalist, was also there. So that is exciting to read all that. Now they're connected with Fritz, and they are back in Tanzania with 1,000 booklets to distribute to the Chinese, plus a box of children's books. So be fun to find out next time what happens. So this is a value for value podcast. If you found it to be helpful, please consider contributing. I am in full-time volunteer Christian missions, and we do rely on churches and friends and family to support us so that we can do the work that God has called us to. So again, thank you very much for tuning in. And next week we will continue reading Rudy's book, and we will read about contacting the Chinese. So I guess you can like, share, and subscribe if you found this on any of the social media channels. You can find all of the previous episodes over at missionarystories.org. And you can check out there and also find out what else I'm doing with Youth of the Mission and in missions. So again, thank you very much, and we'll catch you next time.